Morning again, everyone. I'm Mark Healy. I'm the Executive Director of the Ivey Academy, the Learning and Development Wing of Ivey Business School in London. If you joined us for either of our first two sessions, you'll already know I'm still here broadcasting live from Paris, Ontario. Paris was once voted the prettiest town in Canada by Harrowsmith magazine, which of course is well read by our friends in the agricultural community, Martha's family and my mom. Thanks everyone for taking time out of your day today. We really hope you get some value here. I said this last week, and I'll say it again today because it's still true. One of the three guiding principles, the first one actually that we're using here at the Academy to try and guide our navigation through these rough waters, is to try to be as helpful as possible now and kind of worry about everything else later. So that's to our clients, the broader market, our alumni base, the school, the communities we serve. And to try to do that in a humble way. Martha and I talked about this, yesterday. As a business school, we know we're not on the front lines of this like our healthcare workers are. They're having a really tough week. So a shout out to everyone on the front lines. Obviously not an easy time for anyone. It's tough, it's stressful. For some, it's scary. I wouldn't say that's particularly so for leaders. That would be a little disingenuous in a way, but I would say it's amplified for leaders and leadership teams. Today, we have Professor Martha Maznevski with us to shine a bit of a light on leadership approaches and styles, what she's seeing and talking to clients about as we try to figure out how to react and what to do. So let's introduce the team that will be with you today, as we always do. I'll host and moderate. We also have our steady hand, Sean, with us. Sean, can you say hello, please?
Hi, everyone. Thanks again, Mark.
Sean's going to be our tech lead. More importantly, he'll be keeping track of and curating questions that we're getting through the chat and the Q&A, and we will have time, so we'll address those. Sean and I will come in with themes that are emerging from everyone listening and engaging with us as we move through the session. However, our special guest today is Martha. Martha is going to do Hercules meets Buddha. I think of it as a love story. It's a love story we're doing for you today. Martha is a professor of organizational behavior at Ivey. She's one of our faculty directors for executive education here at the Academy. She's an expert in global teams, global leadership, culture, identity, empowering individual differences. She's published widely on these topics in academic and management arenas, and also works closely with leaders and companies around the world on innovative approaches to leadership at all levels in today's highly complex environment. Dr. Maznevski completed her PhD here at Ivey with research on multicultural teams, has expanded that research stream throughout her career. She publishes the popular textbook International Management Behavior with some other folks here at Ivey. Her research has been published in leading journals and business publications. Her current research unlocks the performance of dynamics and lateral teams that coordinate across multi-unit organizations, such as global key account management teams or matrix products or functional groups. Martha works closely with us here. I've learned a lot from her in our time together and watching her work with CEOs and boards of some of, frankly, the biggest companies on the planet. And it's just so impressive. So this is going to be a really great session. Martha, could you say hello, please?
Hi, everybody. A nice shout out to Vedant, the first person on the chat there. Great to see that you're here. Nice to catch up with friends.
Okay, if you tuned in last week for our session with Tony, we're going to try to be quite interactive, even with what's a relatively large audience, but we will keep the pace fairly brisk. There'll be kind of three sections here: Hercules, and then Buddha, and then application. More on that in a minute. But before we kick off, Sean, can we get some notes from you on how all this is really going to work, please?
Sure. Thanks, Mark and Martha. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. So as always, we would love to hear from you during the session. First, you can send your questions by clicking the Q&A icon in the bottom of your window. You can also upvote other questions by clicking on the thumbs up icon. So Mark and I will be posing a few of your questions to Martha throughout the session, and then we'll do a bit more of a deep dive into the Q&A in the last 15 or 20 minutes. So on the right side is your chat icon. If you double click that, it will open in a separate window where you can leave us feedback and talk to each other. So make sure you set your message to broadcast to all attendees so we can see it. I think Martha might also ask you later to participate with some responses in the chat, so stay tuned for that. Welcome also to everyone tuned in on YouTube. The full recording will be posted on the Ivey Academy blog and YouTube channels. Everyone registered today will also get an emailed link of the slides and the recording, so keep an eye out for that. Thanks again for joining us, and back to you, Mark.
Yeah, just one more note on that. So the last couple of these we've done, we've been absolutely flooded with questions, which is amazing. We did our best to get to a handful of them throughout, especially on the major themes. But if we don't get to your question today, we will do our best after the fact to address that in some sort of follow-up format. So let's get going. Martha, can you start with your perspective on what you're seeing right now in terms of responses from leaders, how that relates to the work you do at Ivey, and then frame up Hercules meets Buddha, please?
Yeah, no, I'm happy to do that. As you've seen from what I've done in the past, I'm really interested in how leaders lead in highly complex situations when things are changing so fast, when you are leading, but you can't know where you're going. As Tony shared with us last week, things are changing all of the time. And even if you've got good communications, as we learned from Kanina, you still have to have a direction, but it's not possible to know where you're going. So how do leaders manage in that? And what I see mostly, and what I'm also seeing right now, is that the natural tendency for leaders in these very complex situations is to lead harder or to lead more, to kind of lean in to the leadership. And when things are really uncertain, it can almost get to the point of being frantic with this kind of high adrenaline plus caffeine kick all at the same time, Gatorade plus Red Bull all at once. And I'm seeing kind of some of that right now. I'm seeing a lot of it. And the dilemma with that is, it's, on the one hand, it becomes unhelpful, right? It's almost like the hamster wheel. So you've got a leader who's shouting out things to everybody, and the leader's role modeling it themselves too, to do an awful lot, but it becomes a little busy. And it's also, frankly, unsustainable for the leader. At some point, the leader crashes, and you can't keep it going. But the dilemma is we need strong leadership right now, right? And as we see, there are a lot of ways that we need to step up and have leaders. So how do we find that balance? And this is something that I've looked at again and again in the financial crisis, even before that, and seeing it again now. I think you're even experiencing it a little bit too, Mark, right?
For sure. I mean, one of the questions I asked you is, what happens when we run out of adrenaline? And I'm conscious of it for myself. I'm conscious of it for the folks that I'm talking to, and I know you'll sort of get to that. Can you talk a bit about Hercules meets Buddha, and where did this come from, and how long have you been looking at sort of this concept?
Well, Hercules meets Buddha is a really fun way to look at the different sides of leadership that need to come together in situations like this. So Hercules and it's really a conversation between these two. So what I'd like to do is introduce you and everybody here to Hercules first. Great. And have kind of a conversation with Hercules, and then we'll introduce you to Buddha and have a bit of a conversation with Buddha, and then we'll bring the two of them together, because clearly what leaders need to do in a situation like this is bring Hercules and Buddha together. But let's explore each of them a little bit first, and what they might both give us. Incidentally, the Q&A, for a session like this, this session is less about an expert answering questions and more about me helping you figure out your own path of leadership through all of this, and be able to kind of just take a step back and think about your leadership at this point. So I know it's called Q&A, but can we think of it as the dialogue box? I know there's a chat, but we can also think of it as the dialogue box too. Okay? That's
great. Yeah, a couple of questions have already come in already. One around nonprofits, and one in slightly more dangerous territory, asking about FDR, Obama, and our friend Donald Trump as well. So maybe we'll park those for a little bit, and let's get to the introduction of Hercules. Let's meet Hercules.
Okay, so you've all seen or heard about Hercules. Hercules is a great archetype. It comes from Greek mythology. Hercules is a demigod in the stories, the son of Zeus, the king of the gods and goddesses, and a mortal woman. And Zeus's wife did not want Hercules to be around, and so threatened to kill him, but finally agreed that she would give Hercules 12 tasks to do. And if he achieved each of these tasks, he would get to live. And of course, they were difficult, impossible tasks to do, each one maybe a little bit harder than the rest. But Hercules, being Hercules, and why we have the stories about him, accomplished each one of these. And they're fun stories. We love them. We see the memes from these stories throughout Western literature for sure, but even in Eastern literature and other parts of the world as well. We see values like hard work, the importance of strength, right? And not just physical strength, although that was important, but also mental strength, stamina, power. I mean, what do you think of when you think of Hercules?
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I think about raw strength. I think about courage. I think about drive and just this unrelenting sort of desire to keep going.
Innovation? Do you think about innovation?
Maybe a little bit, but probably not a lot.
Yeah. Well, so interestingly, Hercules was really innovative and is really innovative towards a goal. So Hercules is really goal driven. But if you think about, in fact, every resolution of a Herculean tale, it has kind of a twist in the ending, right? So the Aurelian stables, where he had to clean out the stables of the gods, he cleaned them out by bending the rivers so that the rivers would flow through it, right? And that's pretty innovative, I think you'd admit.
Yeah, and you talked a bit about, I don't know if ironically or not, but kind of the first good exemplar of SMART goals. You want to talk about that?
Yeah. The Hercules tales all had SMART goals, right? So specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, time bound. Sorry. So cleaning out the Aurelian stables, he had to clean them out by dinner time, and if he did, then he would get 10% of the animals. And he would be able to move on to the next task. So this is clear management by objectives. It's a SMART goal, other than being achievable, but that's the point of the story. So we can kind of put that aside. And it had clear outcomes from it that Hercules had. So, we may think that we invented management by objectives in the 20th century, but in fact, it's been around since Hercules. So Hercules Hercules principles are around a lot in business. We see them everywhere. They're in KPIs, they're in management by objectives. They're anytime you measure results and you're going to achieve results, we see Hercules. And if you think about what Hercules might be good for, right? So Hercules, well, what do you think Hercules might be good for?
Yeah, I mean, I do
You
think
can have answers coming in on the chat too, right? Just pop this up. What do you think Hercules leadership in everyday leadership? What do you think it's good for?
I think setting direction, getting folks behind sort of a clear path forward and some things that we're going to try to achieve. That would certainly be one of them.
Yeah, good. And I see crisis popping up, getting stuff done, exactly, perseverance. Yeah, acute decision making, showing strength and resilience. Yeah, so somebody just said solo hero. He wasn't a builder of teams. It's an interesting thing, right? Do people like following Hercules?
Well, you think you're seeing a lot of it right now. I would guess you're going to say that right now people probably do like following Hercules. They're looking for a signpost or a beacon or a lighthouse, or use your analogy. They're looking for someone and something to follow.
Right. Yeah, and I'm seeing a bunch of things coming through the chat, right? Having achievable. In fact, people actually, so we can differentiate between good Hercules and bad Hercules.
Sure.
A good Hercules would be a Hercules that actually accomplishes things, okay, and has a goal that people agree is a decent goal, right? And is probably good at knowing what they're doing. So people actually like following a good Hercules. Partly because they get stuff, right? So if you were with Hercules, for example, in the Aurelian stables, after he eventually he killed the king and he took all the animals and the king's wives and he moved on. And if you were one of Hercules's followers at that time, you got some of the animals and the, sorry, not the wives, the daughters, but you got some of that treasure as he went along. So following Hercules, you get stuff, and sometimes it's a sense of achievement. It feels good. But you also get real tangible things when you follow Hercules. He looks out for his pack. Yeah, he actually, so Hercules is the follower. And this is what's interesting. Our two deepest fears as human beings. So if I kind of back up into some of the psychology around this, our two deepest fears as human beings, the first one is the fear of exclusion. And the second one is the fear of uncertainty. Okay, now most of us as young children, most of us, not all of us, have enough experiences with inclusion and certainty that those fears don't drive us every moment of every day. But they're still always kind of inside there. And so anything that heightens them, if a leader comes along and resolves those fears for us, it feels really good.
Does
So
a
if you,
crisis heighten those?
well, let's come back to that in a second. Sorry, I'm getting backlit more here because it's getting brighter. I'll come back to that in a second, okay? Because of course it does, right? So if you're following Hercules, it actually reduces your uncertainty, okay? Because Hercules tells you what to do.
Right.
And it also reduces your fear of exclusion because, as somebody said here, Hercules looks out for his pack, right? Hercules looks out for you. Hercules includes you in where Hercules is going. So ironically, people may say they don't like their boss telling them what to do all the time, but actually Hercules satisfies some of the really deep needs of a follower. And interestingly, it satisfies those same needs in the Hercules. So as a leader, if you're being Hercules, you're decreasing your uncertainty in the moment. Maybe not in the long term, but in the moment, you're decreasing your uncertainty.
Because you're taking control in that moment.
You're taking control in that moment, exactly. Yeah. And ironically, you're decreasing your exclusion too, because you're telling other people what to do and they're doing it. Okay, so it seems a little weird, but it's actually a very, very self-reinforcing dynamic where as leaders, we actually like being Hercules because it fulfills some deep needs. And as followers, we like following Hercules because it fulfills some deep needs that we might not even be aware of in the moment. So now a lot of what people said Hercules is good for is in a crisis, right? And when you're time bound, when things are urgent, right? So you just ask in a crisis, do we get more Hercules? What do you think?
I would guess we get all Hercules.
Right? Yeah. But, well, I don't know. Have you ever worked for a boss? And I'm sure some people on here have worked for bosses that define things as a crisis when they're not actually a crisis?
Yeah, I have.
Yeah.
For sure.
Okay. Right?
Are you saying that's more about them than it is about the company or the situation?
It's interesting, right? As a leader, if I define something as urgent, it gives me permission to be Hercules.
Yeah.
So I can see it as urgent or a crisis. Now, I'm not saying we don't have a crisis right now. For sure we do, right? But yeah, when everything is important, nothing is important, right? So if I say it's a crisis, that means I need to be Hercules, and it gives me permission to do it, and everybody feels good about it in the moment.
Not to get too geeky historical precedent, but you've been staring at this for a long time. Would you say that this is what you would have seen in 08, 09, or other moments of sort of widely accepted crisis moments?
A lot of Hercules, yeah, exactly. And it becomes kind of, it's Hercules directed everywhere at the same time. Yeah.
And one of the things you opened with was there can be some not so great consequences or outcomes from that. Could you just talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, well, we're getting good input from the chat here. I can't see the Q&A rename dialogue box. Can Hercules lead Hercules? Yeah, it depends. That's a more complicated conversation, but I'm happy to come back to that. Yes, Hercules can lead Hercules. But what's Hercules not so good for, right? We talked about what Hercules is good for. What's Hercules not so good for? The child requires a parent. What do you think? We'll get some things. I can see the chat. I'm not watching the Q&A. So if you want to, helping people think for themselves. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, empathy, empowerment. Yeah. So, and this is exactly right. So Hercules is very Hercules driven. Love. Well, I don't know. Hercules could do love, just different kinds of love, right? Hercules is very Hercules driven, right? Hercules would take on a goal, and that's the goal that Hercules goes for. Hercules is less other driven, right? So Hercules will tell you what to do, you do it, but you don't make the choice for yourself. And that means Hercules is not empowering people. Hercules is not delegating, is not supporting, is not encouraging. Hercules might be good at innovation, but Hercules is not good at broad creativity or seeing new opportunities. Okay, Hercules is going to do the straight line. Hercules cannot get other people committed internally, intrinsic motivation, right? He's going to focus on the extrinsic motivation, doesn't consider the other ways of thinking and so on, challenging people. Yeah, exactly. So these are the places where we need to bring Buddha in. And you're going to get all these slides afterwards, including some slides that we're not going to show. So when you get the slide deck, you'll get some more of the background on this. But let's, Sean, if we can just show the slide with the purpose and direction, the Hercules slide. Yeah, you can just build it through, show the whole thing. Right down to the blue box. There we go. So this is just a summary of what we learned from Hercules. We call them, interestingly, we call them the labors of Hercules, right? They come from tasks to do. And we see it everywhere in management. It's really good for a lot of things. It's great for coordination, alignment, short-term results, clear authority, sense of purpose. Hercules gets the best out of people when the situation is clear and structured. He finds it hard to make choices in ambiguity. Right, so what Hercules tends to do is simplify the ambiguity and rather than accept and absorb the ambiguity. Okay, so let's turn to Buddha for the rest of that. Sean, you can take that down.
Sure.
Thanks. And let's, yeah, go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, there's a question that came in through the Q&A around leading a group of people that you've not had a chance to work with ahead of time, beginning with isolation, the distancing that we're in. Do you want to address this now, or do you want to park this and address it once we're through Buddha?
I'd like to address it once we're through Buddha, but I'll reinforce right now that it is a really important, it's an important question and an important time to lead, right? And it's going to be really important to bring in both Hercules and Buddha at that point.
Let's talk about Buddha then.
Yeah. But we will come back to it. I forgot to mention, I like to use video clips sometimes to illustrate these. And there are lots of video clips that show Hercules' leadership. My two favorites are Miranda Priestley in The Devil Wears Prada and Princess Leia in the New Hope Star Wars movie. I like to use female characters to show Hercules because we tend to think of it as very male, but it's not necessarily. But if you think of those two, you see really good Hercules leadership. I'll provide a couple of examples on the Buddha side too. So Buddha, first of all, Buddha leadership, we're going to talk about a little bit differently. Buddhism is a religion to some people. It's a spirituality to some people. It's a philosophy to other people. It's a history to other people. We're going to look at it as a philosophy and a way of thinking, while at the same time respecting that for many people it's a spirituality and a religion. So the Buddha started out as a real person, not like Hercules. The Buddha started out as Siddhartha Gautama about 2,500 years ago in what is now Nepal. And we kind of have, those of us who don't practice or follow Buddhism, we kind of have this view of Buddha as being a peaceful, let it flow, absorb. And I think from a leadership perspective, what's important about Buddha is to know that that's not how the Buddha became the Buddha. Okay? The Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama became the enlightened one, the Buddha, by living a full life of trying to understand and explore the meaning of life. So he started off in a wealthy family and grew up with a lot of privilege, was raised to be a warrior and a king, and then also wanted to understand the suffering in life and went out and gave away all his belongings, became very poor, and spent a long time learning to understand poverty and suffering. And then through that found kind of a middle way and a balance. But what's important is what comes from that is the importance of exploration, right? Learning, being generous. So where we talk, and eventually to understand the meaning of life, he meditated and reflected and he became the enlightened one. So that's the Buddha. But I want to focus on the process that happens as he becomes the Buddha to do that. We call them the teachings of Buddha. So he developed a lot of lessons where he actually engaged in life and learned about it. So from the teachings of Buddha, we learn about things like trust, generosity, wisdom, giving, and And the goal of Buddhism, the goal of Buddha as leadership is to attain enlightenment. Now we see this, and we've got some good comments there on Buddhism too. It's really helpful to get all of that in. I appreciate it. It's not limited by two values, of course. Yeah. It's funny, the more I read about Hercules, the simpler it gets. The more I read about Buddha, the more complicated it gets. And for a while, I thought I wouldn't talk about it. And then I spoke with a lot of people who study Buddhism and are Buddhists. And they said, no, that's okay. It's okay to keep talking about it, because that's kind of what Buddhism is. You don't understand fully until you become the enlightened one. So exploration is important. So how does this look as leadership, right? It's kind of hard to imagine what Buddha leadership would look like. In fact, I think there's a lot of Buddha in everybody's leadership. We just don't really have terminology for it. We tend to call it the not leadership stuff. Okay, so this is a lot of the informal things that happen around the coffee machine, the water cooler, in between meetings. So the meeting might be formal, but what happens in between in the dialogue, this is all very Buddha-y processes. Buddha leadership is very other-centered. It's not centered on the person. So I just saw somebody put delaying gratification and reciprocity interdependence, right? So it's very much focused on empowering what's inside the other person, as opposed to forcing Buddha's own view on things. Buddha stretches people, so Buddha coaches people, kind of pulls them, but at the same time, Buddha gives people choices about whether or not they're going to follow that. The video clip that I really like to show Buddha leadership is from the movie Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, where Li Mubai, who's both a warrior and a monk, is working with the protege of the person who stole a sword. Right? So there's some beautiful sword fights and so on in the movie, but you can really see Buddha leadership where he's coaching and stretching, and it doesn't look passive or peaceful, but it does look very strong and very accepting. So this is where we see Buddha leadership. By the way, Buddha leadership you can also see in Yoda, and you can see in Kung Fu Panda, but it's a little bit more interesting to watch it in Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon.
Certainly a lot of what I hear in terms of pushback would be, especially right now, if I'm not active, I'm passive, and that's kind of a very linear kind of unidirectional view of something that's I think you're saying is a lot more complex.
A lot more complex, yeah. One way to think about Buddha is to think about it as curiosity, asking questions. And curiosity is really asking questions where you don't know the answer. You know, as leaders, sometimes we ask questions where we really know the answer. Don't you think you should have? What should you have done instead? Don't you think our customers want, right? Those aren't real questions. Curiosity questions are you know, what have you been hearing from our customers? What else have you been thinking about? Those are real curiosity questions.
Do you want to put a bit of a wrap on Buddha? I know you've got a couple of slides. Certainly one slide you'd like to share on this.
Yeah, I do. And I'm just looking at the comments. In a corporate environment, sometimes Buddha would be considered too passive. You know, again, it's really let's talk about what Buddha is good for, right? So Buddha doesn't need to be passive. Buddha can be active. But it's active coaching and active questioning and active empowering. But yeah, it can be thought of as passive because it's not directing something forward, right? So yeah, if we put up that slide on Buddha, and then we'll introduce the two of them so that they can talk to each other. So Buddha is about presence, mindfulness, responsiveness, and so on, and innovation in a creative new opportunities sense. Again, we talk about the teachings of Buddha. I've got a few keywords here. There were some great ones that came up in the chat as well. It's lovely to see everybody pitching in on this. I really appreciate it. It's great to keep this dialogue going. Where we see it in management, the informal processes, we see it a lot of places. We just don't always have a word for it. Buddha principles are great for empowering innovation, long-term results, coaching, finding opportunities, right? Buddha is where you get new ideas bubbling up. And seeing new things. So Buddha gets the best out of people when things are clear and unstructured, but Buddha doesn't do things urgently, and Buddha does not give clear direction. So clearly we need to find ways to bring these two together. Now, do you want to bring up anything that comes from the chat or anything there, or the Q&A? Mark?
I don't think so.
Both of you
There's,
together.
I think some of the what I'm seeing in the Q&A is just a little bit applicable for maybe 10, 15 minutes from now.
Okay. Okay, so at this point, people are, you're probably anxious to see how we're going to bring these two together. So Sean, you can take that down and let's talk for a minute about, you need Hercules and Buddha. So hopefully right now, I've got you convinced that you need both, right? You may think you just need Hercules in a crisis, but you probably need some Buddha too. And so at this point, you should be thinking about, how do I bring the two of them together? This is actually the key of what I've seen with leaders leading in high complexity. At this point, you might be saying, well, in crisis situations, I'm going to be Hercules, and in non-crisis situations, I'll be Buddha. Right? And this is what I hear a lot from leaders. Or if I'm working with a new team that doesn't know me yet, I'll be Hercules. If I'm working with a team that does know me really well, I'll be more Buddha. If I'm working with people who don't know the task and how to do it, then I need to be more Hercules. If I'm working with people who are, maybe high-level professionals that know what they're doing all the time, then I'll be more Buddha. And what I've seen from leaders in highly complex situations who lead effectively is actually a very, very different logic from all of that. Okay, it sounds like it should be situational leadership, but it's not at all. Okay, what I've seen and what I think people need to remember to do right now really well is good leaders in complexity are Hercules 100% of the time in all situations. And good leaders in complexity are Buddha 100% of the time in all situations. Now, I know I'm not a numbers person, right? Tony gave us lots of charts last week. I'm not doing that. But even I know that 100 and 100 adds up to 200%, and you can't do that. So a very Buddhist comment. Yeah. But really what's going on here is the logic is that good leaders pick a few things to be Hercules about. And they're Hercules about those things all the time, every single conversation, every opportunity to interact with somebody, every email, everything, no matter who's in front of them, no matter where they are. They're Hercules about those few things all the time. And they're Buddha about everything else all the time. So in any given conversation, whoever they're talking with, whether it's their staff or direct reports or customers, are going to see both Hercules and Buddha in the same conversation. They may see Hercules one sentence and Buddha the next sentence, but it's going to be clear that they're informed by each other. So just to give you a sense of seeing that, Sean, if we can put up that slide, the one that starts with, that has both of them on it, and you can put the bubble on as well. For most leaders, what you need to be Hercules is about is something around these few things. One of the keys to this is that nobody else can tell you what to be Hercules about. Okay, you actually, as a leader, actually have to decide for yourself what to be Hercules about. For most people, most of the time, it's somewhere around this short list. There's some kind of clear mission and value proposition. Now, not the one for the whole organization, unless you're the CEO for the whole organization, then it is the whole organization. But for your piece, what value do you create for other people and what's important about that value? Why do you need to? Something about some values, you're going to have the organizational values, but some specific subset that are really important to you in your role and maybe even you personally. Some simple and clear authority. So who's allowed to make which decisions? It's interesting. People can't be empowered unless they know who can make which decisions. So around these core ones, you have to be Hercules about that. And then there might be some core processes. This will depend a lot on your industry or your function where you are, but there are a couple. But the idea is not to have Hercules be too big. Hercules needs to be pretty narrow, and then really obsessively be Hercules about those things. And then Buddha about everything else. So innovation, empowerment, lots of get people talking to each other rather than always being the center of the discussion. Ask questions, develop alternatives, encourage a lot of diversity in the subcultures. It's kind of hard to picture what this would look like. So the two movies that I usually use to illustrate it, and I would recommend people go watch these. You can pick them up anywhere. One is Nelson Mandela in Invictus. Okay, if you watch that movie, there are many, many moments where you can tell exactly what he's Hercules about: reconciliation and getting the right people in the right places. And at the same time, he uses every conversation to empower people and get people to make choices and coach people around that. Another example is Gene Kranz in Apollo 13, and that example may be more appropriate to the crisis we're going through right now. Failure is not an option. And if you watch a lot of the clips through that movie, but especially those around how are we going to bring those astronauts back down, you'll see very, very simple and clear Hercules. And at the same time, the encouragement of different ways of solving problems, exploring them, going out and talking to other people without him always needing to be in the center of it. Okay, I'm going to pause there. Why don't we take that down? And now maybe we can go back to a couple of things, and then in about 5 minutes we'll do the word cloud.
How do you feel about how this fits with leaders' instincts, especially in a crisis? Do you think it's I think it's not instinctual for leaders to shift into sort of bringing both of those mindsets to the table. I think it's instinctual, not necessarily to go to Hercules, but to go to where your strengths are as a leader and to just live there.
Yeah, clearly.
Can you comment on that?
Yeah, clearly. Whenever we feel uncertain, we go to our strengths. And we overplay our strengths to the extent that they may become weaknesses. For most leaders in business, that strength is Hercules. And then couple that with what we know that people tend to go to Hercules when they feel uncertain in general, and people want to follow Hercules when they feel uncertain. So in a crisis like this, we see a lot of uncertainty. One of the examples I'm seeing a lot right now, everybody I talk to is involved in some kind of scenario planning. Okay, we need to do scenario planning. I'm not saying we shouldn't do scenario planning. Of course we should. But I'm amazed at some of the level of detail that people are either initiating or requiring in the scenario planning. 6 months from now, what should line 37 on our plan D of the accounting for the second level HR be? It's the scenario planning when we're only Hercules, that's what it looks like, right? And we have to have a little bit of modesty and humility that we cannot predict. Predicting is a way of trying to control, right? So we cannot predict where we're going to be at 6 months from now. And if we're really trying to plan and scenario plan to that level of detail, really what we're doing is pulling in too much Hercules. On the other hand, if we're scenario planning in a way that encourages discussion and dialogue, so as a group, we're saying, what are the key factors that are going to most influence our business model over the next few months? And what kinds of changes should we be looking for and monitoring? And how can we be continuing to create value around that? What ideas should we be exploring? That's a Hercules meets Buddha way of doing scenario planning that allows you to keep direction, keep people empowered, use it as a growth opportunity, and also keep sustainability. You're not going to burn people out by doing 70,000 different kinds of scenario planning and then suddenly end up with people not being able to contribute ideas anymore.
That's a great point about having more folks involved too, right? I'm doing this right now, and I've done this in the past, and it tends to be quite quickly becomes a narrowed down team that notionally sort of lock themselves in a room for 3 days and do it, which is it's a tricky thing.
And that's probably not helpful right now, right? That's, again, it depends on your industry. I don't want to say that that's never good, right? There's so many, as everybody who knows me knows, I like to say the answer to every management question is always, it depends. Right. Yes. So it's, then we talk about what comes afterwards. But for the most part, scenario planning to a high level of detail in a small closed room is the fallacy of Hercules, not good Hercules meets Buddha. And it's not going to bring people together over the long run.
I just want to use your "it depends" as a bit of a bridge, because it's showing up as one of the themes that's in the chat. It's a question that's in the Q&A about the idea of situational leadership. And I think the notion there would be that different situations require different leadership styles or different reactions. And I think some of it, maybe a lot of what you're saying about Hercules meets Buddha, is that that's not kind of the way to go, that you have a consistent frame with which you approach the world regardless of the situation. You just talk about the tensions between those ideas.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. So I'm not disagreeing with situational leadership. This is kind of one level beyond situational leadership, right? So in situational leadership, we learned that with some, we should adapt to the personality of the person that we're leading.
Yeah,
right?
That's literally one of the comments or the questions
Okay.
that came out. Literally that.
Yeah. And Buddha would say the same thing. And Buddhist leadership would say, of course, you need to adapt to the follower. So this is not denying situational leadership, that as a leader, your behavior should be different in different situations. But it's in highly complex situations, it's layering on top of that you need both consistency and empowerment in every situation, no matter what it is. And so if you as a leader carry around in your head, sitting on your shoulders or wherever, both Hercules and Buddha, and they're talking to each other all the time, then your situational leadership is going to look more like consistent adaptation than it is like a chameleon.
Fair enough. One of the things I've been wondering as we've talked through this, and I think I've seen this come up twice, is let's assume for a minute that you're not the CEO, because most of us aren't the CEO. We don't have the entire enterprise responsibility. What are some examples of being Hercules when you're not the CEO, or what to be Hercules about when you don't have the entire enterprise?
Well, so whatever is in your area. So if you're looking after a particular market, a set of customers, then that might be what you're Hercules about. We're going to provide the best value to this set of customers. If you're in charge of plant quality in manufacturing, you're Hercules about certain quality indicators, and the reason for them is because the customers care about them, not just because they give us good numbers, right? So the key is to connect what you're Hercules about to why it matters, not
So
just sorry?
Be Hercules about guiding principles, be Hercules about objectives, be Hercules about the frame within which people are going to work.
But not 20 objectives.
Yeah, and that's one of the other comments you've seen, is you're seeing a lot of volume, I think, right now, volume of initiatives, volume of priorities. Or am I misreading some of your comments?
I see a lot of volume, and on the one hand, there's nothing wrong with volume, because this is, Buddha it gives you volume, right? This is good. What's the problem is if Hercules demands volume, right? So if Hercules says, I need 27 initiatives in the next 2 weeks, and they've all got to do this, then you're going to have a lot of Herculeses running around. And one of the examples I love to use in if you know the Star Wars New Hope movie, Princess Leia, she becomes Hercules and gets them out of this situation right at the beginning by shooting everybody up, but she takes them straight into the garbage bin where they almost die. Right. So if Hercules is insisting on this volume of 27 initiatives, everybody's going to miss some cues in the environment about some other things we're doing. If Hercules insists that everybody works on one of these 3 things, and then spends some time working on other things they think are interesting, and brings the report of those things to all of us, then you might get the same volume, but the energy is completely shifted.
To the extent that this instinct isn't in a lot of us to try to be balanced, to try to bring both of these traits and these frames to the table, do you have advice for leaders and decision makers on how to kind of remind yourself to not default into one or the other? So
I actually think it is in everyone. I think we just don't know how to talk about it. And in my experience, once we kind of unlock the permission to be Hercules. So one of the things I notice is people say, I'm Hercules when I have to be, but I know Hercules is bad. Okay. And so I'm therefore only Hercules when I need to be. And all the rest of the time I'm Buddha. Okay. Distractions, right? I just got a Buddha moment there. Sorry. The problem is, because of all the reasons that we've talked about, if that's the way you're operating, you end up being Hercules more. So Hercules, I think, gets a really bad reputation. The idea here is that you actually have to be Hercules. I love Hercules, right? You have to be Hercules. You have to give yourself permission to be Hercules. You even have to give yourself obligation to be Hercules, but just around these things. And in my experience, the best way to do what you just said is to actually tell yourself, no, it's good for me to be Hercules. I must be Hercules around these things all the time. And if you've got that in your head all the time, it's actually much easier to bring both of them to the front all the time. It's when you're trying to suppress Hercules that it's hard to be both of them.
Sean is rightly reminding us that we've got an interactive exercise.
We'd
the
like
word
to
get to, and we don't have a ton of time, so why don't we get to that?
Okay, so what I want to do, we're going to make a couple of word clouds here, and I hope that as we've been talking, you've been thinking what you need to be Hercules about. So we're going to do word clouds with what you put in the chat here, which means ideally it's one word that you put in. If it's two, join them so there's no space between, so we know that they go together as a word when we put it into the word cloud software. So what's one thing that you need to be Hercules about right now? We'll give you a couple of minutes to put things in.
There's some good ones coming in already. Yeah. Wow, lots of reaction.
Yeah, and there's some similarity, and there's some differences too. Some variety. I like that. Lots of cash, lots of safety. Lots of communication. Good.
Sean, how you feel? You think you got enough there?
Yep, we'll let a few more responses trickle in, but leave it with me and we'll see what the trends are.
Okay. And can I ask the second one now too, or you want to pause for a few seconds before?
Give it a couple minutes. Yeah, there's still some answers coming in.
Okay.
Is this, Martha, are these the kinds of words that you would have expected? I mean, we sort of set this up yesterday. I think as you were thinking ahead, is this what you thought you would see?
So a lot of them are, right? So things like communicating the cash, safety, some compliance, some quality things. So some of them are more Buddha words, right? So there's delegation, even communication could be a Buddha word. Empathy, right? I need to be Hercules about empathy. Usually we think more about I need to be Hercules about things that are related to the direction of the business and how we're running it, or the organization if it's not a business, deadlines and that, but not all deadlines, hopefully, right? Because the next question, of course, is going to be what can you do to be more Buddha, right?
For sure.
But maybe before we do that, to give Sean a chance, why don't we show, Sean, can you share a slide too? The KPI about Hercules. Be clear to simplify.
Good call.
Can you do that at the same time? I actually have KPIs for are you being Hercules enough and are you being Buddha enough? So because we mostly live in a Herculean leadership environment, it's always good to have KPIs, but you'll see they're a little bit unique. So this is my KPI for are you being Hercules enough? You need to be clear about these things. They're non-negotiable. Every single dialogue, every conversation is an opportunity to be more Hercules about these things. Absolutely obsessive, unapologetically obsessive about the things that you're simplifying and driving forward. So the KPI, how do you know when you've got it right? Is that other people start saying it themselves as if it's their own. Okay, so you start seeing it in emails, or you start hearing it in other conversations when your staff, for example, or your teammates start to talk to each other. Well, we really need to do this because, or here's a way of doing X, and they really take it on. Part of what I love about this KPI is that you can only measure it if you're being Buddha enough. Okay. You actually have to give virtuous, right? You have to give people opportunities to interact, and you have to be there to hear them. So that's how you know you've got Hercules enough, if those things are passing through the organization. Sean, can we go on to the Buddha question now? What do you think?
Yep.
Okay. So again, back to the chat. One word, or if it's more than one word, join them together so we know that they need to go together. What's one thing you can do to bring more Buddha into your leadership? Yeah, I see a lot of listen already. Listen, patience, curious. Yeah.
Yeah. Questions.
Yeah. Meditate. Good. Yeah.
Yeah. Introspection
Sometimes
is
if I, introspection, kind of reflecting yourself is a really good place to it puts you in the place where you can bring out and be Buddha for others. Suspend judgment. Good. I like those. Now, Sean, I'm going to ask you to multitask again. Can we show the Buddha KPI while the rest of these are coming in? Yeah, I saw bite my tongue. I worked with a CEO once who said the way he learned to be more Buddha was by sitting on his hands during meetings. So and then just kind of repeating to himself, Buddha, 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 when he needed to be Buddha.
Of breathe coming in through here, which
yeah, good. Yeah, and I think we need a lot of that right now is breathe, trust. I see coming in. So here's my KPI for are you being Buddha enough? Where clarity is the word for Hercules, are you being clear on the priorities and the direction? Curiosity is kind of the key word for Buddha, and we used it a lot when we talked. If you can be curious, you're likely to follow into good Buddha behavior. Curious about people and curious about the task. So building the relationships through curiosity about people and building innovation and ideas about the task with curiosity there. So how do you know when you get it right? This is, by the way, my very favorite question to ask leaders. And if you've worked with me, you've heard this question in different ways. I've asked it to you in different ways, but what have your staff done recently that you would have never imagined? It completely astonished and delighted you. Now, the most common answer I get to this is my staff do lots of things that delight me. They're really wonderful. I've got great staff, but they don't surprise me or astonish me very often because I'm kind of hands-on. I like to be involved. I like to know what's going on. I think it's really important to know what's going on. And my response to that is that you're probably a really good Hercules leader, but imagine what could happen if you were a little bit more Buddha. Okay, because the delight part is Hercules, right? So if your staff are doing things that delight you, then you're being Hercules enough. They know what takes you in the right direction. But it's only if they're doing things you would never have imagined that that you're letting that empowerment happen. Things are popping up. They don't need to be big, huge things. They can just be little initiatives, little things that they're doing for each other around it. But you would never have thought of it yourself. But they're doing it for each other, or they're doing it for the business. So that's how you know you're being Buddha enough. Yeah. Okay, we can stop sharing that now, Sean, if you can multitask again.
So no, Sean's almost ready with word cloud number 1. So same question as you look at some of the themes that are coming in through the chat on Buddha, what you would have expected, or are you surprised and delighted by any of these answers that you're seeing?
I love them. And so I tell you what I like about it. I like that there's a combination of other-centered behavior. So trust, listen, delegate, empower, and internal behavior, which is about preparing yourself to be more Buddha-like. So reflect, meditate, look after yourself, be present. Those are all really, really important for a leader. And again, right now, I see a lot of leaders being too Hercules. There's also a tendency to forget to look after ourselves in order to prepare ourselves to be Buddha. And that's not sustainable.
The Digby family is asking if we aren't really talking about raising kids.
Yeah, a lot of this definitely applies, including the tendency to want to be Hercules when things are out of control. That's also very, very applicable to families.
So we have our first cloud ready. I'm going to share it, and we'll get your reactions. This is the Hercules cloud, right? This is the Hercules cloud.
Nice. Nice. So I find it fascinating that there are some Buddha-like words there: compassion, empathy, right? And I saw them come up a bunch of times. And I think that's, when we look at Nelson Mandela and reconciliation, he was Hercules about reconciliation. So I think you can be Hercules about Buddha-like things. And, depending on what industry and what's your context right now, this may be a really important time to be Hercules about some Buddha-like things for you. So it's interesting. And then, yeah, communication decisions. I hope people have in mind what specific decisions they mean, not all of the decisions. And then cash, yeah, and that came out of Tony's webinar last week as well, right? The importance of cash, budget, balance. Clearly important for companies right now as we prepare for whatever recovery is coming. And I'm glad to see that safety is the biggest one here. Both safety for ourselves and health is up there as well, because that should be the first priority. So I'm glad to see that.
You imagine in a lot of organizations, safety would always be first. Just obsessed with that for all the right reasons. But for in a few places where that maybe hasn't been top of mind, you could imagine that carries forward beyond whenever this crisis comes to an end too.
Yeah. I think so. I hope so. Good. Other things? Do you want to pull things out of the Q&A or the chat now, Mark?
Yeah, I want to come back to that question about leading folks remote. The fact that we're not together, the fact that maybe some people started during all of this, and we didn't have a chance to build trust, and we didn't have a chance to get to know some folks that we're leading now through this mechanism.
Yeah. So it's a good point. And if you're leading virtually and you're leading a new team virtually, both Hercules and Buddha are even more important. Right? So as a leader, being really clear about those few things that are important right now, but also building the relationships through Buddha. Don't be tempted to be only Hercules, especially if you're new. Because you really need to build those relationships, and those relationships are much harder to build virtually than they are face-to-face. I'm in the process right now of doing a bunch of blogs about that we'll publish in the next few days. But virtual leadership, the two hardest things to do virtually are to build trust and commitment, relationships with trust and commitment, and deep knowledge about whatever it is you're doing. It's easy to pass facts virtually, but it's hard to get meaning around those facts. So if you're new with a group or new to leading it virtually, there are a lot of things you can do to really focus on those two. So be Hercules about a process to get there, as well as some of your goals, but that also really build the relationships that will let you bring out the Buddha things later.
Any tips and tricks there in terms of modalities or time, or do you go group or one-on-one?
Yeah, so the single most important thing for working virtually is to set up a heartbeat with your team. Okay, and the heartbeat is a series of regular face-to-face. Now they can be virtual like we're doing right now, but regular face-to-face meetings that are kind of time bound. They shouldn't be full days, right? It may be so it might be a couple of times a week for an hour, right? That you get everybody together. If it's a new team, it might be a little bit more often or a little bit longer. And then the second thing is, so they have to be regular, so people can trust the regularity and they've got that rhythm through it. Sure. And that's one of the things you need to be Hercules about, is the regularity of it. And then second, what you do during those heartbeat meetings has to be both relationship building and information meaning sharing. Right. So if you're using those meetings to share spreadsheets and PowerPoints, then it's a complete waste of time.
Right.
Okay, you need to use those meetings to discuss the meaning behind the spreadsheets and the reports. And again, Hercules meets Buddha comes in, all the daily check-ins, that. So the Hercules. So again, that's an example of situational leadership, right? You would lead differently if it's virtually than face-to-face, but Hercules meets Buddha crosses those.
Sean, how are we doing with number 2?
We're ready with number 2. And
we're up against it on time. Let's go.
Here it is.
Oh, beautiful. Yeah. I like
So listen
question. Yeah.
is clearly the heaviest weight. Empathy, compassion, patience.
Lots of consistency there.
Nice. Those are great.
Martha, we're pretty tight on time. I want to make sure that we give the last substantive word to you before we talk about what happens next. How would you like to wrap this?
Keep Hercules and Buddha chatting with each other inside you. It's great. What do you really need to be Hercules about? This is the hardest part of Hercules meets Buddha. Give yourself permission, obligation to really be Hercules about that. And enjoy the Buddha. And this is actually a way of empowering and having sustainable leadership. So you'll last longer in your leadership. And at the same time, you'll empower other people to higher performance and to develop their own leadership. I've seen it across all kinds of uncertain situations, all kinds of ways. And so I'm really confident that it will help people right now.
That's awesome. Thank you. Sean, I want to make sure we come back to you. How are we going to do follow-up? Let's just remind everyone here.
So we'll collect all of the questions and review the chat for some of the questions that were in there. Sorry, not chat, discussion box is now what it's called. And we will follow up online. So we will either create a Twitter thread for Martha to follow up or include some of the questions in a blog post that will be live later today.
Sean, wizardry from you as always. Thank you, Martha. Thanks so much for agreeing to do this. I know you questioned a little bit whether this mechanism would even work. I thought this worked really well today, and hope everyone in the audience got some value from this. So thank you very much to you. Thanks to everyone who tuned in, and we'll be in touch with what we're going to do tomorrow and next week soon. All right, cheers.
Thanks.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.